Seated furthest to my left is Joanne Peake with the Prospect Lake District Community Association. Thank you for joining us. Seated next to her is Gislason from the South Island Prosperity Partnership. Their purview is thinking about the economic development and prosperity of the South Island region as a whole. In the middle, someone I'm sure familiar to many of you, this is Andrew Duffy from the Times Colonist, a longtime commentator on municipal affairs. Someone cheering?
I think someone's heckling already.
Heckling already, okay.
Probably Dallas. It sounded like Dallas.
Then we have next to him Jonathon Dyck, who is with the Victoria Foundation. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Victoria Foundation. One of, I think it's almost 200 community foundations across Canada now, and they are amongst the largest and most sophisticated of the members of that network. They do incredible work ensuring that funds are provided to causes and charities, and also looking out at the common sort of interests. Every year or so you produce the Vital Signs report, which has become a standard for residents to understand some important trends in their communities. Lastly, Leo Spalteholz from Homes for Living, and Homes for Living is an organization that does everything it can to try and advance the cause of affordable housing in the area. So lots to cover. Again, I've asked them just to take a few minutes off the top, set out their stall and perspective, and then we've got lots of time for questions from you. I'm going to start, and everyone's wondering, where am I going to start? Well, Leo, we're going to begin with you, and we're going to move across the panel in that direction.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, so my name is Leo Spalteholz. For those who don't know, Homes for Living, we founded about 2021. Grassroots organization. We're all volunteers, no funding of any kind. We're just basically advocating for fewer barriers to housing, more and more affordable housing in the region. And so we're sort of advocating both on the municipal level and the provincial level as well recently. And you know, it's just kind of interesting once you look into how housing is approved, you kind of realize that 80% of the problem is us punching ourselves in the face and then wondering why our faces hurt. So, you know, on amalgamation, it's on paper, from our perspective, very attractive, because you look at, we have 13 jurisdictions, everybody does things slightly differently. Some do things very efficiently, some do things not so efficiently, some do things in like outright hostile ways when housing is concerned. And I think not to be understated how fundamentally different Victoria and Saanich are when it comes to actually letting housing be built. So I do have the numbers in front of me. I looked at how many homes were completed in Victoria in the last 5 years. That's 4,764. And then in Saanich, 1,686. And to put that into perspective, Victoria recently did their housing needs report, and they said over 5 years, they would need about 8,250. So they're doing, you know, about half of what they thought was the need. But if you look at, you know, the entirety of the policies together, for every home that Saanich is approving, they're kind of blocking 2 other homes from being built. And that's not even getting into the fact that they have about twice as much land. So big differences. And I think the big risk, you know, there's lots of opportunity, great efficiency, all these kinds of things that could happen. The big risk is we stack 2 bureaucracies together, and we look at some of and it just slows everybody down, right? So, nevertheless, I think, you know, you look at some of the research that has come out of Ontario, and that has kind of been what has happened in some of those amalgamations, is there was big hopes and then the reality not so great. Nevertheless, I think there's lots of potential. I do have some sort of specific thoughts on how not to do it and how to do it, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm Jonathon. I'm with the Victoria Foundation. I'm their Senior Director of Marketing Communications, been there for about 4 years. Used to live in Victoria, right on Harriet Road, and now live in San Antonio over by Big General, so know both communities very well as well. So a little bit about the Victoria Foundation. So we've been around since 1936. We were actually started by Burgess Gadsden in the soup kitchen on Pandora Avenue. And his mother, Fanny Gadsden, was the first one to give us a donation. That was a donation of $20 in 1936, so just think about how much money that was back then. With her donation, she wrote a letter, and we actually still have this letter, that said she wished she could have given $100 to such a fine undertaking. So take that, almost 90 years later, next year will be our 90th anniversary, and have been able to grant out $340 million to the community, including $27 million in 2023. Don't quite have 24 numbers yet, as those are being finalized, but really working in partnership in the community and looking at how we can address challenges, collaborate, and get funding to the charitable sector. Our organization today really focuses on what is that sense of belonging in the community. How do we build that? How do we make sure that people feel that they belong and that it's a lasting impact? Because there are a lot of barriers, and there's also a lot of opportunities to look at. So today, as I address you, I think as you're considering your viewpoints, there's two things that I'd just like you to consider. One of those is, how will the decision that you're making and the viewpoint that you're putting forward impact a sense of belonging in our region? And then the second piece that I'll get into is, how will it impact the nonprofit and charitable sector? So those are the two things to just keep in mind. So I know that in the pre-call, it was said that a lot of you have referenced the Vital Signs report, which I have right here and have copies up there. But we do produce it every year to take a test of how are people doing in our community? What is that checkup that people are feeling? And so last year, the overall grade that we received, which was done by over 6,500 residents, the overall grade that people gave the region was a B, which is down from a B plus the last couple of years. So we're doing well, but there's still some room for improvement. Over 50% of the respondents were from Victoria and Saanich. And with Vital Signs, we've always made it, this year will be our 20th year producing it, and we've always made a conscious effort to make it a regional document rather than going down to that municipal level. And part of that is that we can look at it and tackle challenges as a region and be able to do that. Highest grade was in sports and recreation at a B plus, and the lowest grade was in housing at a D minus. When we asked about what are the most important issues, cost of living was first, housing was second. When we asked about what are the best things about living in Greater Victoria, natural environment, climate, air quality, parks, and walkability were the best ones, followed by friends and family. So just briefly, I just want to touch on the impact of the charitable and nonprofit sector. We call it the civil society and do that type of work too. People have different names, third sector, those type of pieces. But sometimes people think it's a small sector, and they think it's just this thing that's there and does work in the community and is there. In 2018, we did an economic analysis of what is the impact of the nonprofit sector, and you can actually pick up the one pager from this as you go to the door. But what we found was that the civil society in the Greater Victoria region actually contributed $3 billion to the economy, and there were 63,000 direct jobs, $300 million in municipal taxes paid by the nonprofit sector. So those are substantial numbers when you think about the sector as a whole. And then when we add a multiplier, it's about $7 billion, 122,000 jobs, and $584 million in taxes. So it's a sector that when you're making your decision, just think about what would happen to some of these organizations. A lot of them work regionally, but some of them do work within their municipalities and do that work. So just making sure that that's top of mind. When we think about where nonprofits are at right now, we do a state of the sector report almost every year with a group called with Vantage Point. And what they found last year was that out of the nonprofits surveyed across province, and our numbers in Victoria are very similar, 84% saw increased expenses, 75% saw increased salaries, 66% saw increased programs and services, 68% saw increase in admin costs, and 76% saw increases in demand, and 29% saw drops in volunteerism. So those are all direct impacts in the community and direct impacts on these organizations. So those are the two big things that I'd ask you to think about as you're making your decisions. I'll pass it over to Andrew.
Great. quite like following the Victoria Foundation. Right? They do good and important work. I, on the other hand, line budgie cages and help you train your dogs. Yeah, it's not fair. I should let Dallas do this. Anyway, I'm Andrew Duffy. I worked for the TC for nearly 30 years now. Body by journalism. This is what happens. Don't let your babies grow up to be journalists. I didn't know what possible perspective I could offer you. You guys are doing the deep dive on this, or what I could do that would be useful. So I did ask Peter what he'd like me to talk about. He said, well, turn your head to how the region's currently set up, and is it suited for purpose, and is it likely to suit our future needs? And I mean, the cynic in me goes, are you kidding me? But I had a really good lunch the other day with a senior Victoria City councillor. Well, there's only one senior Victoria City councillor who's been around for a long time. And he and I turned our head to this a little bit, and we said, well, you know what? If you picked this region to settle and spread 450,000 people around it, is there any chance in the world you would choose to have 13 little fiefdoms, 13 bureaucracies, a smattering of police stations, fire departments, and a CRD? There's not a chance you would choose that governing model, would you? It doesn't make any sense in that respect. Now, we also didn't go the other way. We didn't see it being, and I know I'm not supposed to really weigh in on what I think, but that's what I'm paid to do. It's sadly the remit. But we wouldn't go the other way either, and didn't see it as being one ring to rule them all. That doesn't work here. I've always seen it as three separate entities here in the region, broken up by geography. That would make some sense, but my opinion, and $12 will get you a latte downtown. What I would say is that stars seem to be aligning a little bit, I think. You exist. The Citizen Assembly existing is a feat in and of itself. The discussion is important. The work you're doing is important. If for no other reason to create ideas, options, and things for these councils to think about. I say it's also aligning the fact that I've never seen councils struggle so much as they are right now with the financial reality of a massively growing region, a region with more demand than ever, a growing population that wants more. At the same time, you have crumbling infrastructure. You've got systems breaking down all over the place. Something needs to change. There needs to be some sort of new model. I don't know if it's an amalgamation of Saanich and Victoria to start it. I do believe it should be some sort of harmonization of services of some kind, something in between. I leave that to you, the big brains out here that have been doing the work and getting through that 200-page report that's sitting on your desk that I wouldn't want to see on mine. So I think things are starting to line up for you to have an impact, which I think is exciting. It's also an awesome responsibility you have. Now, I will caution you in that, I sat down with Mayor Saanich last week and we talked about this a little bit. It's heartening to see Saanich for the first time in a few terms be open to this. I think they were dragged kicking and screaming into this process. The previous council, I don't think was as game as the Victoria Council was. Now, having said that, we're here. You've got to this point. They've committed financially, and they claim to be open to the ideas that come out of this. Now, I'm paid to believe that that's, I'm not so sure that's true, but that's me. I'm a paid cynic. I'm paid not to believe what they say, but to look at what they do. I will be intrigued to see what their reaction is to your recommendations. I think they're going to debate them. It's going to be phenomenal to watch. It'll be great theater. It'll keep me in a job for another year, which is nice, as a legacy media type. But at the end of the day, I hope you guys have the faith that I don't. And I'll leave it at that. All right, thanks very much.
Hi everyone, my name's Dallas. I'm running for mayor of Cadboro Bay. Just kidding. Thought I would start with a quick poll. Please remain seated if we should amalgamate. No, just kidding. 100%. Oh. That's a joke. I'm with the South Island Prosperity Partnership. We are an economic development agency for the Greater Victoria region. Unlike many other economic development agencies you'll see in North America, and pretty much every metro or city in North America has a version of what I do. So it's not, we didn't invent this and pull it out of nothing. Every city in Canada pretty much has something like this. The difference with what we do is that we are a regional alliance model. So we look at Greater Victoria metropolitan area. And we are also a public-private third sector alliance. So we have private sector members, we have all three post-secretaries are members and founders. The Victoria Foundation is actually one of our founding members, as well as municipalities. We also have 9 First Nations that are involved as well. So it's a very collaborative model for economic development. So starting with there. So what am I here to offer you? I thought it would be an interesting question to ponder with you. I guess two-part question. One is, what is the right sort of organizing unit of the economy? That's one question. And then the second question is, if we can explore that question, what would be the way that we would want to intervene in that to make it perform how we want it to perform? So whatever those outcomes we want to see the economy achieve, what would be the best way to organize ourselves around achieving that, right? And those goals could be, I mean, if they could be on one end of the spectrum, it could be about GDP growth and expansion, or it could be about sustainability and clean jobs and transitioning to a clean economy, right? You can have everything in between. There's a whole different range of things you could do in terms of economic interventions. And so let's talk about the first question. So the organizing unit of the economy. I think we all know what the economy sort of means in its abstract. If you zoom in on it a bit, though, you'll see that what the economy actually is really just human behavior. It's us going about our lives and buying the $12 latte with our paycheck, which we derive from our job or our source of income. If we're retired, we have a source of income that we earned over a career, in theory, and then we go about our lives, right? So that's what the economy is. If you zoom in on it, it's just a collection of human behavior. Economists like to joke. They say there's this single unit of the economy, so they call it an econ. It's like this rational being that's supposed to make rational decisions, like balancing your household budget, for example, would be like a rational thing that a rational econ should do. And then if you just aggregate that, the total of all that activity is what we call is what we measure. We typically measure that as GDP, right? And so what's the right organizing unit of the economy? If you think about what at the highest level, what the economy is, it's global, right? So the globalization, and you just need to look out the front window and wait, and you'll see a bunch of Amazon delivery trucks driving by, and that's the global economy at work. You're ordering stuff through a screen, and then Amazon is triggering it, and they're gathering it from probably mostly China, and they're delivering it to your house, right? And that's an example of how the global economy works. Everyone here probably has a phone in their pocket. What does it say? If you have an Apple phone, it'll say designed in California. And what else? Manufactured in China, right? So that's the global economy at work. So now, when you think about Canada, what is the Canada economy? Well, the Canada economy, or the BC economy, in my view, actually doesn't exist. Because if you think about that's what I said earlier, human behavior, well, none of us behave inside of Canada as a whole. What we do is we behave in our community. That's where the economy exists to us, right? We drive to work. We collect our paycheck, we buy our groceries, we pay our rent, the $12 latte, and other things, right? So that's what the economy is. And so let's examine that for a second. In our region, how would you then decide the container that activity is existing in? Well, you would look at a couple things. One would be the relationship, the geospatial relationship between where you live and where you work, right? That would be one way to look at the container of the economy. In our region, if you look at the data, the majority of the workforce don't work in the same municipality that they live. So they cross at least one, sometimes 5 municipalities on the way to their work. Actually, I rode my bike up to meet with a counselor in North Saanich, and I was thinking on the way back, I was like, yeah, I crossed 5 different jurisdictions, one of which was a First Nation, but 5 jurisdictions between my house and that meeting. So it's just interesting to think about that. So that's one way to measure that. So in my world, we call that a commuter shed, right? Now, if you look at Stats Canada, what they do is they say, hey, we've crunched all the data and we've actually already determined what your commuter shed is, and we call it a CMA, a census metropolitan area. Ours is 13 municipalities, a little over 400,000 people, and that's a commuter shed. People live in Metchosin and Langford and Sydney, and they work in Saanich, Victoria, and elsewhere, right? And that's just the reality, and that's what the data shows us. So that's one unit. The other unit would be, okay, so how do we go about our daily lives? So we call that consumption, right? How do we consume the services of the region, whether it's healthcare, education, childcare, buying our groceries, paying our rent. And if you examine that, what you'll also find is that the way that we behave, the way that the economy behaves, is we also cross multiple jurisdictions. If I asked you a simple question like, let's say someone from out of town was visiting the region for the first time and you wanted to, as a pride of place, you wanted to show off the region. What's the top 3 places just in your mind? You don't need to answer. Just in your mind, where would you take them? And there's a very high chance, somewhere around 100%, that you would probably take them at least to one of those 3 places outside of the municipality that you live. So you wouldn't show them the coffee shop next door. You might go to Bouchard Gardens, or you might go to the Inner Harbor, or you might go to the beautifully named Dallas Road and show off the beauty of the region, right? It's just so we think of the region in terms of our pride, and typically it's going to be a multi-jurisdictional case that we would make around how the economy works, how we consume it, how we derive income from it, and how we. So that's a statement I'm going to make. I'm not saying amalgamation or not amalgamation. All I'm saying is the organizing unit of the economy is definitely a commuter shed and how we go about our daily lives in terms of consumption. And then the next question I would examine, and maybe I'll do this in a future question, but would be, how do we then organize ourselves to intervene if we want to steer that economy toward things like inclusion, or things like lower unemployment rate, or things like jobs for our kids? Is there anyone here that doesn't want their kids to be able to stay in the region or grandkids if you have them? The answer is obvious. Like, we obviously want our kids to be able to stay here and build their lives here when they get out of the house. I have 2 boys, one at UVic, myself, and I don't want them to move to Toronto. I don't even want to visit Toronto, actually. No offense. Anyway, so I'll stop talking there, but more to explore.
My name's Joanne, and I am a member of the Prospect Lake Community Association. I'm a new member, just for a couple of months. I moved to Saanich about 5 years ago, but had lived in Victoria for 3 years beforehand, and I still own a house in Victoria, so I'm straddle both. I don't represent any kind of organization except our small community, which is a rural community within Saanich. So we have some very different concerns compared to what Victoria would have. We're very concerned about things like our lakes, because they are really getting destroyed by an invasive species called milfoil, and it's really affecting the lakes. And even if you live in Victoria, I know a lot of people come and use the lakes, and so I think it's really important to do something about this invasive plant, which is going to choke the oxygen out of the lakes within a certain amount of time. Also, we have things that I asked some of our members what was important to them. What would they like to see if there was some amalgamation? They would like to see better transport, municipal transport. We have almost none. So there's like 4 buses a day, and you have to walk 2 kilometers to get to the bus. So it is an issue. We would like to use more public transit, but it's not really a very viable option at this point. Also, which I didn't even know, there's a large group of housing within rural Saanich that has no water. They still have just wells. There's no municipal water, which is a real issue coming up, especially in the summer when we're having droughts, and they would like to see if maybe with amalgamation, if it happens, if there might be some more open ideas about bringing utilities to our community. I lived in Montreal for many years, and I went through amalgamation in Montreal, which was painful, but in the end, I have to say, it did save a lot of municipal money, although right now a lot of people are saying in Montreal it doesn't really matter because it's so corrupt that it gets spent everywhere else, but let's not go there. These are some of the issues that, as I said, that we're looking at as a community in a rural setting, which is, like I said, very different from Victoria. I lived in Burnside Gorge, and I worked with the city council in Victoria quite a bit about unhoused people, and because our community at the time was getting targeted for a lot of housing for people who were not housed, and there are even though everybody's very open to it, there's still a lot of challenges that comes with. So I have had some good and bad relationships with some of the people on the Victoria Council, but I think it's worth really trying to work with our governments and see what we can do to improve our communities as much as possible.
All right, I see a question right away. So in the booming voice, Richard.
Thank you, everybody. It was very informative. I really like your stuff, Dallas, because being a retired person, I sometimes forget about the economy. And it's really, really relevant that you bring us back to, my weak voice, that you bring us back to reality. My question is with Jonathan. Jonathan, you said that you would ask the Assembly to consider the effect of amalgamation upon the community. What is your perception? Because I can't come up with that vision. I can't give those considerations because I don't have the criteria. Maybe you could tell us how you believe amalgamation would affect the Victoria Foundation, or possibly the other half of the coin, where if we do not amalgamate, how would we be affected?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I'm going to take it, I'll just say that we take a very apolitical response to what we do, and so I'm just going to put that on the table as something in this response. I think that one of the things and one of the challenges that we've been seeing is, and I put it as one of my key points, is this lack of sense of belonging. And this isn't just a Victoria challenge, this isn't just a Saanich challenge, this isn't a CRD challenge, this is a challenge across country and around the world right now, is that people are having more challenges in terms of feeling that they belong where they are. And so Community Foundations of Canada, so that was referenced right off the top, they also do a vital signs report, and they were looking at sense of belonging and how people are feeling. And so since 2013, sense of belonging has dropped 12% across the country. And our numbers, when we look at our vital signs statistics, are very similar. 29% of people do not have close friends or family in their community, and 12% said they have no close friends at all. So I think that one of the criteria that I'm asking for when you're looking at this is, how can you pull the communities together? How can you make people feel that they belong and that they're part of something that's bigger than them, and that they're not just an isolated person living in a house, driving to work, taking the bus to work, or taking the bus somewhere else. That they're not just isolated in their own place. And so I think that Victoria has a lot of great aspects to it. As I said, when we talk about the most important issues, the best things about living here, friends and family is number 6. And so the other ones are climate, natural environment, those type of things. So those are about the beauty of the region. Dallas and I have a lot of conversations about it. I believe that you were talking about this at the Vital Sense launch last year, that a lot of those top 5 greatest things aren't things that we actually impact for the most part. We have to preserve them and we have to be there. But it's something that, how do we actually make it so that we can make people feel included in the community and be able to be there? So I hope that helps answer that question.
Maybe I'm going to be a little more specific. Would amalgamation improve that sense of community or belonging?
I think that there's 45 people in this room who can answer that better than I can. So I think that, from my side, from a Victoria Foundation perspective, I think that we need to look at, when we look at the vital signs stats. So if you ask me, what would I want to see over the next 10 years and do that? We've been doing vital signs for 20 years. So how do we see the vital signs statistics around belonging and engagement increase? How can we see people feel like they belong, that they're there, that they feel connected to the community? So I think that that's where my answer would go to, is for me, and it's not just about amalgamation, it's about our region as a whole, but I think that that's something that each person has a different way of being and a different piece of it. So I think that's a challenge for us.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Great panel, great comments. My question's for Leo. Follow up to what you had said earlier about the number and the rate of housing that was built in Saanich and Victoria. One thing that I'm curious about is, we see a lot of homes being built in Victoria. A lot of it's going straight up, a lot of smaller units, and we know that Saanich tends to have larger single-family or more detached homes. Can you expand on those stats, or even just generally, how many people got housed in that home building versus how many units were built?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have it in front of me, but if we look at the trends in the region, I mean, neither municipality has a lot of greenfield land. I mean, basically zero, round it down to zero, right? So what's being built? Mostly apartments, and that's true across the region, right? Like we are at kind of a 30-year low of any kind of like single-family detached construction. Even Langford's running out of sort of a lot of greenfield land developments. So mostly apartments. The average size may be a little bit bigger in Saanich, but I'm not 100% sure on that. There's actually no stats that are really keeping track of that. But if you look at sort of the bulk of the starts, it's going to be apartments for both of them. Recently, that's been largely rentals. And that's kind of different than we've seen in the past, 30 years, 40 years, where we had a real drought of rentals. Recently, because of financing, because of a bunch of other things, federal government has really shifted the development pattern to rentals.
Could I ask you a follow-up question on that? Because Leo, I'm very concerned in our communities about the not-for-profit housing sector and the fact that we have wait lists of up to 4 to 5 years in some of our low-income seniors housing in particular. Can you make a comment on that at all?
Yeah, if we look at where a lot of the below-market housing has been built, it has also been the city Victoria. And I think we're seeing this in lots of regions where supportive housing, not just supportive housing, but like all below-market housing types are really concentrated in the downtowns. And there's been concern around that recently where it's like, no, it would be better if we had that more spread around rather than sort of focusing it in one region specifically. I know Vancouver is raising that as an issue.
We have some in Saanich.
Yeah.
Dawson Heights and Mount Doug, and there are 400 or 500 people in those housing units, all low income and mostly with the shelter aid for elderly renters.
Yeah.
But it's still not enough.
Yeah.
And I would like to see more cooperatives between government and the not-for-profit sector in building those houses that are so badly needed, and I'm not sure how we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if amalgamation would solve that problem.
Yeah, and I don't think we have any evidence that it would. I will note that if you look at what it takes to build affordable housing, like speaking to affordable housing developers, it's incredibly frustrating because all the same barriers that are sort of preventing other types of housing almost count double for affordable housing, right? Like they have to jump through even more hoops, takes years, and then often a ton of money gets spent and then it gets declined in the end or just no longer viable. The cost of construction goes up too much because it's been 3-4 years trying to get it approved and it gets canceled. So yeah, I think a lot of people say, well, we would be in favor of affordable housing, but the reality on the ground is very different. They face a lot of barriers.
Leo, can I just?
Yep.
So I would say to that both Victoria and Saanich seem to share a brain here when it comes to affordable housing and seniors housing in particular. Saanich has just agreed to 3 different grants for seniors affordable housing. And there is, their new rapid deployment both in Victoria and Saanich. They're trying. I think it just takes time. I honestly don't think amalgamation makes a difference one way or the other, as I think both municipalities are already on the track. It's just, the monolithic pace of change, right? It's ridiculous. And Saanich, to its some credit, has been trimming red tape, has been trying to streamline its processes. So it's getting there, but my God, it's like turning the Titanic around while it's on the bottom of the ocean floor. Right, this is not easy. Victoria took forever to do it. They were a little ahead of the curve, but they got there. So it is coming, and there are projects in the Nellie McClung Library is going to have an affordable component, right? The redevelopment of the Sandwich Operations Center will have a massive.
Well, and Dawson
affordable-
Heights is building one.
Absolutely.
100 new beds.
Yeah.
Or places, and even at that, we still have a 3-year wait list.
I know it's crazy, isn't it? It's not like the lead is getting any less. I mean, we have an aging population and things change, right? So I do think it's coming. It's not much, it's cold comfort, I know, but it is sort of in the mail.
Can I add, I'm gonna add just one like economics layer to this. Anytime you talk about a service that's delivered by taxpayer funding, like a tax break, let's say, the more units of that, whatever it is, a housing, a church, whatever, the greater the number of units that a municipality has, you're spreading that cost essentially on the rest of the taxpayer. So in this question, if you said, okay, the majority of the below market housing is in the city of Victoria, that means their taxpayers, they're spreading it across less taxpayers than would be the case in an amalgamated situation. So the economics of it would simply change because there'd be more taxpayers to spread across that subsidized item. Whatever the item is, it's the same argument, right? That's just an economics layer on the question.
I have a question for Jonathon, but just before, we were talking about affordable housing, right? And you're saying that it's mostly in Victoria. From my perspective, I would understand why it's in Victoria than in Saanich. Prospect Lake, they have homes there, they don't have transportation. You're not going to build affordable housing in Saanich if you haven't got new road network, new transportation. That's the reason why affordable housing has to be in a place where people don't have to take transport to get where they're doing. If you go and give somebody a house in Saanich and Prospect Lake, they can't come into the city. They'll be frustrated. They'll cost out the government, right? So I think, Zin mentioned, amalgamation might, come and help, but the benefit might be long term, not a short term. People will still be frustrated depending on how things swing as it is. But I have a question for Jonathon, and I know it's hard for you to say yes or no. This is not a yes or no question, but for us to kind of make that consideration, given what you do, which seems to be it's been a large scale and health system community. Currently, how has working with Victoria and Saanich been in your position? Where are things so if you're dealing with Victoria, the municipalities, how have you found working with them? How have they affected your job? Has it been easy in any way? Is it different? And maybe that would give us some consideration.
Sure, and I know that with that last question, I think that one of the things I just want to go back to in the response there and building on this question is, I think that for each of us, we just have our own perspectives, and we've all come to Victoria and Saanich in a different way. And so I think that when we talk about belonging, each of us does have a different viewpoint on it, and there's things that can be barriers to that. When we look at the vital signs survey again, you look at the safety responses, and so it's very interesting when you start looking at safety as a category and the perceptions on that. Those who are generally older and have lived in Victoria longer have a lower grade on safety than those who are younger in Greater Victoria. And so it's a really interesting piece, and we have subject matter experts that we talk to about why that might be. And part of that is sometimes it's longevity in the community, sometimes it's seeing those changes, sometimes it's there. So I think that when I say that, people have their own pieces and like that there's, this isn't just a Jonathon Dyck perspective, I think that that's the important part. In terms of working with local governments, I mean, to be honest with you, we've had great partnerships with both. We have found really good support from Saanich and Victoria. Victoria helps us with our Vital Signs event. Mayor Alto came and spoke at it last year, and they were a sponsor for that. Saanich we've presented to a number of times and have a good working relationship with and come out. I think that one of the big things too to just consider when you're looking at these pieces is that both have granting programs, and sometimes there's also granting programs within the communities that are specific for that community, where it's, you know, that these grants have to be spent within the City of Victoria boundaries or within the District of Saanich boundaries or what have you. And that is some of the way with some other funders and that as well. We're regional in scope, so we don't necessarily have that barrier. But a lot of our nonprofits are actually really regional in scope, right? And so when I can tell you that there's 1,000 charitable organizations across the region, but when we start bringing it down to who's actually in Saanich, who's in Victoria, who's there, it's much harder number and a much harder piece to actually look at and be able to say, well, there's, you know, 50% of that in Victoria, because a lot of these organizations, and the Intercultural Association is a good example, that cover the entire region. And so I think that just part of it is that their services, and I just want to go back to Joanne's point too about transportation, is that I think that, you know, for a lot of these services that's a big part of it is, you know, it goes from a wide range of spectrum in the charitable sector, from healthcare to sports and rec to housing to just a variety of services that are delivered in the region. So I think that's a big part of when you're thinking about this decision, how does that impact all that, and how does the decision-making impact? Does that get more specific for you?
Yeah, but and a quick follow-up, do you think the granting program would increase if we come together? Or would that make it less, you know, or would people get less cut because we're together?
I think that with the granting programs, it would be hard to say without actually knowing what that would look like. I think that, like, to determine, like, would there be more, would there be less, would there be something else? Both have a bit of a different angle on them right now. But I think that when you look at them, it's about trying to keep in mind that they are there and that they're more targeted. So I know that one thing that we're trying to really work hard on in the Victoria Foundation is looking at organizations and being able to fund and working with donors to be like, okay, instead of funding a specific project or that, what if we go to areas of greatest need for that organization? So trusting that organization to put that money to where it's most needed, and to long-term funding, because a lot of organizations will get funding for a year, for 2 years, for 6 months, for one project, and that's really hard for them to hold on to staff doing that. It's hard because if you're a staff member and you're like, I got a project for 6 months, how does that feel? How does that feel when you're trying to figure out what you're gonna do to feed your family and do those type of pieces? So, I mean, we know that the need is rising within the communities, and we would hope that that would be the case, no matter whether there's amalgamation or not, that municipalities are paying attention to that. But I think that it would be hypothetical for me to guess.
Thanks everyone, this has been really refreshing to have outside-in thinking into the group here. One of the things I'm trying to keep my personal inquiry in is the reality that as a assembly, we're not making a recommendation about amalgamation for 2025 or even 2035. Like, that's those 10 years, if we decide to make the recommendation, is to go through the whole process of getting to referendum. And so really, at least for me, the way I think about it is thinking we have the task and responsibility to make these recommendations for a region that we don't know yet, that's 25, 30, 50 years out. And so I guess one of the things I'm struggling with is, even in this report we got, it's in a way it's backcasting. It's like, this is what has been, but we haven't been as immersed in what could be. And what, as to your point, Andrew, like, how do we need to be structured to meet the challenges that we can potentially, we certainly can't predict them or forecast them, but we might be able to at least grapple with them and think about them. So I'm curious, from each of your perspectives, and from your vantage point, like, what could happen in the economy, and from a journalist perspective, and what you're privy to, and the conversations, like, what are people talking about what this place could be, the economy, you know, things that are within and without our control, and how do we need to be structured to be resilient and meet the demands that are coming at us? Because I'm worried that we're talking about today as is, and when we make a recommendation, today is going to be long gone, and what's it going to look like?
Joanne, do you want to start?
Well, from the rural perspective, I know there's a lot of opposition to opening up any kind of development. in the rural part of Saanich. And personally, I think we should all be thinking seriously about that. And if there is, the proper infrastructure, I think that should be definitely looked at, because there is a lot of land, and I own a home on 1/3 of an acre. I mean, that's a lot for one person. Do I like it? Yeah, I love it. But I see a lot of housing where there's huge 10-acre tracts, and there's only a couple my age living there. So I think we need to really think about sharing, and in the future and in the near future, and maybe it will have to be done, by laws or whatever. But I don't know. I'm probably being very unpopular in my own area saying these things. But I'm originally from Montreal. I lived in cities all my life, and the only reason why I moved to Saanich was because I didn't want to be in cement anymore. I'd done that for many, many years, and I love where I am. But there has to be some kind of sharing going on.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you have a garden? Like, food security is going to be a big issue when you can provide a lot of food on your property.
Yes, I do have a garden. It's not that big because it's me mostly, for me. Most of the people I know have small gardens. I'm not a very good gardener, I must say, but I do try, because I haven't had that experience in my life. Like I said, I've lived in cement most of my life, and so I haven't had the experience of gardening. I have now the last couple of years, but that's another thing. There is lots of land that could be used for community garden and things like that as well.
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. Something I think about a lot. The future of the region, that's what economic development is. Like, you're exploring sort of what's possible, what are the systemic challenges. Just to name a few that are all blatantly obvious. Has anyone looked at the demographic structure of this region? What's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years is that the demand for healthcare is going to skyrocket even worse than it is today, because the older we get, we need more services, right? And the question I would then ask is like, okay, so who's going to deliver that service? It's probably going to be working age health professionals, right? Hooray! How do we get them here? Where are they going to come from? What are their spouses going to do for work, right? I'm dealing with this question right now because there's a doctor that we're trying to attract from Edmonton, family doctor, and their husband works in a field that we don't really have a lot of jobs in that field, but they want to live here. So what do? Right? The husband in this case says, like, actually, I want to go to Vancouver, where my job is more plentiful. And so that's a real challenge in healthcare. It's an economic development challenge. It's not just like, what's Island Health going to do, and we point the finger at them to go solve it. It's actually a community problem and an economic development problem, in my perspective. So that's just one example. Another one that's came out very aggressively earlier this week, which was a hostile partner to the south that wants to go into basically it's an economic trade war that he's proposing against what we thought was a very healthy, positive relationship. And so what do? And you're seeing governments all across Canada in I would call panic mode. They're saying, oh, we're going to cut off this, and we're going to cancel Starlink, and we're going to embrace this new forms of procurement, and we're going to close off all these things. And they're making these very knee-jerk reactions. And my view on this is, actually I have an article coming out next week on this, is that we need to take a calm, collected, strategic approach to this that cuts across all the different avenues that we could actually explore, from trade diversification to import replacement to ownership structures. You'd be surprised if I told you how much of our real estate in this region is owned by foreign parties, like people that, I'm not talking about anything to do with the media narrative on what that, I mean like pension portfolios that own buildings downtown that are bumping the rent up 70%, and then some of our favorite restaurants are closing because they have no choice. So alternative to that would be a change the ownership model for the real estate to a local ownership model that then has a different set of metrics, triple bottom line metrics, that they're judging on that real estate. So that's another one. Another one that's probably very obvious in the last few months is artificial intelligence, like the threat that AI has on mostly white collar jobs, of which our region is plentiful. Like, it's our number one employer in this region is the public sector. And those jobs, I think, could in the next 5 years, a lot of them could easily be replaced by AI. And I'm not saying that as a joke. That's a serious possibility. And so then I would ask the question is like, okay, so now what do we do about that? Well, in my view, we need to, it comes back to the governance question is like, how do we organize ourselves? And I'm not talking about amalgamation in this case. It's how do we organize ourselves to solve problem? It's not just government, it's private sector, it's post-secondaries, it's all the different partners that could be brought around the table to examine those, and that's just 3 off the top of my head that are big ones. If you think about the next 10 to 15 to 20 years in our region, they're gonna be big ones. Like we need to prepare ourselves as a community and actually take some sort of strategic action, not knee-jerk action, strategic action.
Well, this is a fun question, isn't it? I was a little disappointed to walk in here and not see, I don't know, there's 20 tables in here, did not see 20 crystal balls. And I can tell you mine's no clearer than yours, I don't think. I think we, as a guy who sort of looks at all sectors of our economy and our political setup, I think up until about the end of January, I could have given you a general idea of where we were heading. You know, we can't pull up a drawbridge. You know, this island has been discovered. This city has been discovered. This region has been discovered. We're being inundated with people, Canadians from all over the place. We're a very popular place. I mean, you guys live here. You know how awesome it is here. And we're struggling with all of that, all the growing pains that we're struggling with in terms of housing, in terms of services. Dallas referenced healthcare as a huge one here with a growing population that isn't leaving. Once you get here, you don't, I mean, I'm Gilligan. I was sent to private school here when I was 12. I can't get off the island, right? And I'm sure a lot of you are in the same position. Why would you? Once you're here, you wouldn't leave. So, you know, we are struggling with all of that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, my crystal ball's no good. Every time I've made a prediction, it's fallen flat on my face. And, you know, we could be a division of the 51st state, for God's sake, if things go pear-shaped here. Who knows what that lunatic is capable of. At any rate, so yeah, I don't think you're gonna get a good answer out of this, even from big brains like Dallas. There's no satisfying answer in that, yeah, this is what this place is gonna look like in 10 years. This is what it's gonna look like in 15. We can guess, we can model, we can do all sorts of things. Just know there's gonna be more of us. There's gonna be more demand on us. It's gonna cost us a hell of a lot more. And somehow we're gonna have to figure out how to wade our way through. And unfortunately, that's your task at the moment.
Good luck with that.
It was this is a very interesting question, and part of it is we've been doing some thinking around it too, and just looking at the results of vital signs, and that's why last year we chose our theme of what will Greater Victoria look like for your grandkids and the next generation, trying to really think ahead as to like, is there hope in the region? Is there hope that things can change and some of these wicked problems that we're facing can actually be addressed? And you know, it's as we're going into our 20th year, we were looking at the challenges that the region faces, and I mean, most of the years it's cost of living or housing that are number one. I believe addiction snuck in there one year as the number one, and it's always up high. The other thing is that last year when we were doing our vital conversation, again, we keep referencing Dallas. He must have a big brain. So Dallas was talking about statistics around. We've seen our number since the 90s. We've seen a steady growth in Greater Victoria. People coming. People are coming. They're coming. The challenge is that there's a demographic that's staying flat. And please tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it's at a high school to university age demographic, right, Dallas?
Yeah, we have the same number of young people in 1996 as we do today, despite having 100,000 more people. So young people.
So that really stopped me in my tracks when that statistic came up in the conversation, because it's, you know, it's something, it's about jobs, it's about that security, it's about those pieces. And when you talk about recruiting younger people here, you look at the cost of housing and how it's changed over the years. But one of the things that we did ask survey respondents about the future of our community, and 67% of survey respondents agreed the natural beauty of the region would be preserved, which is, I think, a great thing, but it's something that we still have to work on. But 29% of survey respondents agreed infrastructure will not meet, or sorry, yeah, so 29% responded in the positive. That survey respondents agreed that the infrastructure will meet the needs of future generations, which means 71% of people did not. So I think that's a key one. The other one was, I think it was around 13% for people who thought that the region would actually be affordable in the future. So when you're thinking ahead and when you're thinking about it, like, we do have to look at that, and I think that we do have people in this region that can do it, but we have to be able to collaborate, coordinate, work together, and work across sectors to be able to get this done. It's not one person, one sector, one area's job to get this done. We as a region have to do it together, and that's the only way that we're gonna get through these challenges.
Okay, I'm gonna limit my comments just on the housing side, and one really big difference that we're gonna have in the next 20 years versus the last 20 years is that we've been very lucky in Victoria and Saanich that Langford and the West Shore has basically been our housing pressure relief valve. And so, like it or hate it out there, but they have built a ton of homes for people. And now at this point, there's still some greenfield land left out there, not very much. If you look at sort of the map of the urban containment boundary, it's basically filling up, right? Like most of it is being developed or it has been developed. And, you know, despite what you may believe, we're actually not for paving the peninsula and turning it all full of condos, right? Like, I think the urban containment boundary is very important, but I also think that we can no longer escape the fact that we are going to have to make more room for homes within Victoria and Saanich specifically. You know, Saanich especially has a ton of potential on that front. It's interesting, you look at the Saanich OCP, and it actually says, hey, you know, we think we'll grow at about 1% a year. Most of the other families, most of the new families, they're gonna settle out in Langford and West Shore. Well, why is that, right? They're being pushed out. So I think that's gonna be the really big difference. We no longer have that pressure relief valve. And if we do nothing, the pressure is gonna build up. At some point, people are gonna be like, you know what? We are gonna pave the highlands. Like, we got all this land here. The political pressure is gonna be too much. You know, it's happening in Ontario. I think we're gonna have to face that. If we wanna preserve those natural areas, we're gonna have to act on that front.
What is greenfield land? Probably a pretty easy question.
Sorry, yeah, greenfield, just like there's nothing on it right now. So, and by nothing on it, I mean forests are on it. And they're being cut down to build housing versus sort of kind of brownfield, which is like there's something here, it will be redeveloped into something else.
Who is the owner of greenfield land, or is that not relevant to the definition?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, just sort of right now it's undeveloped. Yeah.
I guess this question is for basically all of you except for Andrew. Don't take it personally, but you've each come here kind of with a specific sector or, for lack of a better definition, an axe to grind. So it's a two-part question. One, amalgamation. Are you concerned that the distraction of amalgamation would cause the general public to lose sight of what you consider to be important? And two, if that were to happen, do you think it's worth it? You know, like, because there are upsides to amalgamation from where you're coming from in terms of better regional planning, perhaps a bigger seat at or a better seat at the table with the province and the federal government. So, yeah, the basic question is, are you concerned about the distraction of amalgamation and the political uproar that that's going to cause if we vote yes? And I know this is a bit kind of in the future, but when you put it all together, do you think it would be worth it?
So
whoever wants to take this.
yeah, maybe I'll briefly start there. In general, I'm fairly optimistic that the potential benefits of amalgamation could be bigger than the potential downsides. I'm not really too concerned about the temporary turmoil of like everybody's freaking out about putting two big bureaucracies together. I'm mostly concerned about not ending up in a place where that is permanent. And I looked at research on like how have amalgamations affected housing production in the past, and I couldn't find very much. The one very clear result I did find is that cities that amalgamated and then went to a ward system for electing councillors had huge decreases in approved housing. And so a ward system is basically, instead of voting for councillors as a whole in the city, you're sort of, everyone's voting and running in a certain neighborhood. And often what happens in those places is the local councillor has absolute veto over any kind of project that's proposed in their neighborhood. And there was a study on sort of what is the impact on multifamily units especially, and that those declined 40% in ward systems. So I'm just hoping we don't end up there, but otherwise I'm fairly optimistic.
Without a veto, I guess. I don't think the
Or-
veto's that common. But
Yeah,
Do you want to add on to that with the?
I think exactly what you said. Maybe there's a way to do it without a veto.
you
Yeah.
just don't have one.
You know, it was interesting the day after Vital Signs launch because I was listening to CFAX and there was a person on there from Amalgamation Yes. He was talking about how amalgamation was the bottom of the 14 issues in the Vital Signs report this year. And so it was an interesting part, and his point was all of these issues have to do with amalgamation, and so that was his viewpoint. But you know, it got me thinking, and as I was coming here today, I went back in our reports and took a look. I mean, amalgamation has been in 2009 to 2013 was around 12%, 2014 to 2016 ticked up 14 to 16%, 2017 to 2019 was 11 to 12, and then it dipped in 2020 and 2021 to 7 to 8%, and now it's up in that 11-12% range again in terms of survey respondents. Now we have changed a bit of, like, with that question, it used to be rank your top 3, now it's rank your top 5, so some things have gotten there. I think though that when I look at that question overall, and the biggest issue, and the reason why I'm bringing that up, is because I think it really does come down when we're looking at these challenges, and when you're talking about, is it going to be distracted, is it going to be there? Over the last number of years, we've had a lot of big distractions. Dallas was referring to a few that we've just had over the last couple of months. But when you think about the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on people's lives and what a time that was and how that went, when I look at the numbers going down to 7 and 8%, I'm not all that surprised in 2020, 2021, because people were focused on something else. You know, when you look at cost of living right now, and when you think about inflation and interest rates and all those types of pieces, I'm not that surprised at where the results are ending up in that issue area. So I think that when you talk about it, it does seem like it has a fairly steady track in terms of when people are responding within Greater Victoria. So it is an interesting piece as to that, and I think that it's one of those pieces too that are people getting distracted by other things as well, and also just with our population increase. I mean, some people are coming here and may have their own views on it or may not, and it's something that when you move here, you don't necessarily fully understand all 13 municipalities and what the differences are and those type of things. I came to Greater Victoria 8 years ago, and so it's something that it's something that you have to learn. And so I think there are differences, depending on how long you've been here, what your connection is to the region, and how many of those municipalities you are crossing on a day-to-day basis. So that's all part of it. Sorry, Andrew, but you can answer if you want.
You know what, I'm weighing on this. You can't stop, you can't silence the media. I'll tell you what, I would just say this, I will pass it on the big brain to the left here, but I love turmoil. Sells newspapers, man. And so, bring it on.
Okay, I think it would be an interesting exercise for Andrew to look into the archives of the Times Colonist and see when we first started talking about amalgamation. Because I would guess it's probably like decades.
1800s.
Yeah, like decades and decades and decades at least.
This used to be a 4-letter word.
Yeah. So, I mean, is it a distraction? I mean, for me, the short answer to that question is probably yes, because I don't know, like, if this group was given, like, actual power where you were like, you guys are going to decide what we're going to do, then I would be optimistic, because then you would come to the best answer and I would trust your answer. But that's not what you've been asked to do, is it? Does anyone right now, does anyone think that if there was a referendum right now that this issue would pass? Does anyone think yes? A couple maybes? Yeah. I would say that the current attitude in Saanich, where I live, would be that they would make the simple argument that we have a lot to lose. And simply because they would look downtown and they would say, I don't want to touch those issues, right, with my tax dollars at least. And so for that reason, I would say it probably wouldn't pass today. That doesn't mean the pressure won't change and the ebbs and flows of public sentiment and all that. But for me, the more important question is, like, when we talk about these big issues, and Jonathon mentioned some as well, like the idea of belonging and all this, to me, like, it's a more important question is, like, how do we organize ourselves to solve those problems or pursue those opportunities? That to me is what I call that collaborative governance. And I have a PhD student at UVic right now working on this question, where we're looking at all these cities across North America and trying to look at, not amalgamation, the question is, how do we organize ourselves as cities and neighborhoods and metropolitan areas to solve problems? And for some problems, it's better to organize as an entire region. I would argue policing is one of those opportunities. Like, we should have a regional police force where the members of that force can actually cycle through, like spend a week downtown in Pandora, and then the next week you're up in Oak Bay dealing with, I don't know, someone that stole a bag of chips from 7-Eleven or something. I don't know what the Oak Bay police do, but it would be a mental, but such a great opportunity for that police officer to not have to be downtown every night, dealing with the mental strain of watching someone OD every night, right? And cycle them through. Like, to me, that's an easy situation where you're like, yeah, a regional governed model for police would make total sense. Am I saying that we should amalgamate all 13 into one? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let's organize around the problem we're trying to solve. That's collaborative governance to me. It also doesn't mean we delegate everything to the CRD either, by the way, because I don't think adding more bureaucrats solves any problem that I can think of. So what's the answer then? The answer's in the middle, how we organize ourselves using partnerships like foundations, like nonprofit organizations. Like, in my view, we should have, rather than having an army of police in Pandora, we should have an army of social workers, people that actually have the tools in their toolkit to deal with the problem, which police often don't, or shouldn't, right? Like, they train to be police officers, right? Not social workers. So anyway, that's how I would sort of start to answer that question, at least.
Well, I'm no expert, but I mean, if you're going to amalgamate, one of the things is you want to do it so it makes things more efficient. You don't want to just have one bureaucracy on top of the other and then have a bigger bureaucracy. And that's, for me, I think, a really important point of amalgamation. And I think that's one of the things when I saw it happen in Montreal, it did really streamline the government in the city. And because it was just absolutely ridiculous. Plus, we had snow shoveling and the snow removal, which is a big issue in a city like Montreal, and that was ridiculously hectic when it was many different municipalities. So for me, I'm not for or against amalgamation, but I'd be for it only if it actually streamlines and they can look at the processes that are going on now that don't work in either community and see about fixing them and hopefully doing it together. That's all.
We are just about.
Sorry, I just had one quick, just following on your snow removal story. I remember a story I was told the other day, again by another veteran city councilor. It was around in '96. If you remember the blizzard of '96, the Victoria and Oak Bay were both moving snow, and some of you may remember this story. But Victoria pushed it right up to the Oak Bay border. Oak Bay pushed it right up to and Oak Bay loves a wall. Oak Bay pushes right up to the Victoria border. Unfortunately, some poor bugger had a heart attack. And they had blocked off a neighborhood. They blocked off a route. And the guy had to be stretchered over the ice wall with a night watch and carried over and taken to hospital. I mean, if that isn't a poster boy for what's wrong with the communication and coordination in this region, I don't know what is. But yeah. Sorry, you just triggered that in my head.
We are just about at time, and I think we've all greatly enjoyed the perspectives that you brought. I've got one last very specific question, which I hope you'll give us, maybe entertaining, but also your best advice. Each of you have, whether it's in Montreal and Victoria and now in rural Saanich, been close observers of different kinds of governance exercises. You're consumers of different kinds of policy documents and reports. It falls to this group not only to come forward with a recommendation, but to produce a document that explains its thinking and ultimately tries to be as compelling as possible for the wider community. What advice would you have to the Assembly that it should bear in mind as it moves through its last two sessions, reaches a conclusion, and develops this report?
Okay, so first thing I would say, don't make it 200 pages, because people are not going to read it. So try to be as succinct as possible. Bullet point is always good, but you know, just facetious. But you know, really, I wouldn't go on it into minutia. I would really deal with the top points that would be affected by amalgamation, and be as succinct as possible.
So I'm going to give a quick example. This is something we did recently in a workshop facilitated by a really fabulous facilitator based here called the Roy Group. And what we did that day is we actually created as a region, so we actually broke the room up into West Shore, we called it Central Area because Urban Core was deemed offensive. So West Shore, Central Area, and Saanich Peninsula. And we actually just had the room create two scenarios of the future. One was what we called a hellscape. So, which was a simple question, what happens to our region if we don't solve some of these pressing problems, many of which we've discussed today? So that's scenario A. Scenario B is what would the region look like if we solved all those problems? Scenario A, right? So you have sort of like this heaven and hell into the future 20 years. And then I think that's a useful exercise to think about, because then what you could do is you could apply all your learnings of amalgamation to those two scenarios and say, hey, here's what an amalgamated region might do to prevent us from going down into this hellscape. And here's what some of the things we've discovered might help us pursue this heavenscape, and create this juxtaposition between what would we be missing then if we didn't amalgamate, what would prevent us from going down this wrong path or this right path. That would be a useful exercise from my perspective.
So I just want to clarify, Peter, you're asking what my perspective would be on how you should communicate?
You're going to be, amongst the many people reading the report, you're probably going to be covering the report. And so when you're looking at it, what will you want to see it achieve? And what advice can you give us as non-professional writers in communicating to you and the rest of the region our intentions?
Okay. Clarity actually is everything. Keeping this clear and focused is important. If you want media buy-in to tell your story, to create volume and amplify it, to get it out to the average human being, clarity is everything. Short, to the point, terse if you can be. Say what you mean and say it mean, as one of my rugby colleagues used to say. It's important to get to the point. Preamble is pointless. We all know, this has been, you are decades in the making, right? This has been talked about ad nauseum. I reference the fact that amalgamation used to be a 4-letter word around water coolers when I was starting here in the early 90s. This has been talked about and talked about and talked about. We're finally at a point where some sort of action, and I don't think anyone's going to be satisfied. Dallas mentioned to you guys that do you think this is going to result in a vote one way or the other? Who knows, right? You don't know. You don't get that sense that the community's bought in yet. So in order to get the community to buy in, the broader community to get interested, you've got to grab them. So grab the most important bits of this that is really going to impact your neighbor. Don't talk about the high level stuff. That will get to that. Governments will get to that. But if you can drill down to what matters to Janet and John next door, then you'll make an impact. If you can explain why your neighbor needs to know about this, they may not agree with you, but my job has always been to take the complex, make it simple, and explain to the broad masses and say, this is why it matters to you. This is the impact it's going to have. 99% of the time we're talking money, right? So what's going to cost you to go one way or the other? So whatever your recommendation is, if you can put a dollar figure on it, and if you can't, at least make it impactful for your neighbor.
Great.
I think the clarity point and making sure that it's easily digestible is really important. The other thing I'll just say is trying to think about this not just as a report. So we know that people consume information different ways. It comes across them in different ways. So thinking, and especially when you're talking about trying to cross generations and trying to think about habits, not everybody's going to sit down and read a report. Not everybody is going to do that. So how do you get this into also into multimedia formats where maybe you have members of this assembly or other people talking about what the recommendation is, or something like that in a video form or audio form or some other way, so that it actually brings it to life, or graphic representation. Just because I think that sometimes we do these reports and we're like, oh, everybody's gonna read it and it's gonna be great and they're gonna love it. And you know, that is the case in some situations. One of my team members always talks about the skim, swim, and dive approach. And so what she means by that is some people are gonna skim, and so you wanna make sure that they can get out of it that top level piece. Some people are gonna wanna swim and sort of get in and see where it's at, and some people are gonna take a deep, deep dive into it. And so being able to think about your audience and be able to put it into that sort of a sense is going to be really critical. I think that the other piece I just offer is that, you know, when we talk about the region and we talk about these ideas, I assume that not everybody here is uniformed in your answer as to where it should go and that sort of thing. But I think just, you know, being on the same page and making sure that you are fully supportive of whatever decision the group makes, and then also being okay that there's going to be people that aren't. You know, in the community, I think that sometimes these things, when we challenge assumptions or we do different things, that sometimes people will ask questions, and it's okay, and that's part of it, and people are going to have different reactions to it. So just knowing that you're doing the best job you can, and that you're trying to answer a very important question for our region, which is what's our best way forward. And going back to that answer as to what's the region going to look like in 20 years, I think that's a critical question that we need to be asking ourselves. And what do we need to do today to actually make that better 20 years from now, so we're not sitting around trying to answer some of these questions again in 20 years.
Yeah, I realize this is like a piece of advice that's almost impossible for a report that has 45 authors, but like, be blunt, be forceful, be as controversial in some aspects as you can, given the complex, nuanced nature of the topic. But I think, you know, what is success here? Success is if it can't be swept under the carpet, right? Success is if there's a bunch of op-eds in the Times Colonist and angry Reddit threads, and like, there's discussion, right? And I think, you know, whatever happens after that, that's success in my view, and I think really making it a hot topic again.